Double Dragon was created for release in the arcades by Technos Japan back in 1987. Some people referred to the game as a belt scroller, but today we know it as a side-scrolling beat-em-up game, and it was one of the first to popularize the genre. The arcade game featured large sprites that could wander all over the screen in just about any direction imaginable, all in an effort to get into an advantageous position in order to inflict damage on your opponents. And you had a wide variety of fighting moves at your disposal as well. It was a smash hit, and console ports followed on every popular console of the time. Most people agree that the Master System and NES versions are solid games, and each approach the gameplay of the original arcade release in a different way. But the one port that most people tend to ignore is the Atari 7800 version. When it comes to Double Dragon on Atari, I think the 2600 version gets all the curiosity of gamers, because it's such a weak console to pull the game off on. But today, I want to give that other Atari port of Double Dragon some love. So let's see if Double Dragon for the Atari 7800 is worth a spot in your collection, or if you can safely leave Marion behind in this version. But first, please subscribe if you enjoy the video. It helps the channel out so much more than you could ever know, and you'll be notified whenever we upload a video in the future. Okay, enough of that, let's get on with the review. Double Dragon was published by Activision and developed by Imagineering for release on the 7800 back in 1989. It was one of only 2 Activision games on the console, with the other being Rampage, and it comes in an awesome and unique yellow box with very cool artwork. Just like in every other Double Dragon game, you take on a gang of evil street thugs who kidnapped your girlfriend Marion. There is a 2-player simultaneous mode, so both Jimmy Lee and his brother Billy are represented in the game, which is nice. And actually, there can be a ton of sprites on the screen at one time, and different looking sprites too. This isn't surprising if you know what the 7800 was programmed to be able to do, but for casual fans and people who are just getting into the 7800, well, this is an incredible revelation, I'm sure. Unfortunately, the player sprites and most of the enemy sprites, well, they just look really bad. They all have their chests hanging out, well, most of them do, and they don't resemble their arcade counterparts very much at all. The exception would be Abobo and the backgrounds in my opinion. I actually think most of the levels look really good, and there's only an odd color choice here and there that kinda makes it, well, not great, but it's still really good. But the rest of the sprites, well, they're pretty abysmal. At least they animate well, as most of the moves look pretty good, and they're not difficult to pull off once you get the hang of the controls. The left button punches and the right button kicks, and you can hold both buttons together in order to jump. Using a combination of different directions and the buttons allows you to pull off headbutts, jump kicks, back kicks, and even the fabled back elbow smash. Most of the moves are fairly useless, and the only ones I find myself using are the back elbow smash and the back kick, with an occasional jump kick thrown in for variety's sake. But this isn't unique to this version of Double Dragon, as most of the ports have one move that is better than the rest. However, what is unique to this version is how the enemies behave, and understanding the enemy behavior is key if you want to make it far in this version of Double Dragon. You see, the enemies behave in one of 2 ways. First, they can just wander about the screen in an attempt to get behind you and get the jump on you. They will not attack when they are trying to accomplish this. Their second behavior is simply to attack you, and when they are doing this, well, you don't have much hope against them. They will almost always get the jump on you. So the secret to Double Dragon is to either A, attempt to hit your opponents when they are wandering about the screen, or B, try to back kick or elbow smash them before they can hit you. I'm not sure why they are programmed in this way, but it makes combat feel very robotic and not fluid. In every other Double Dragon game, I feel like I'm fighting my opponents, and I feel like I'm a better karate technician than they are. But in this one, well, I just feel like I'm gaming the system in order to win, and it's not a great feeling. You also have access to a few weapons, but nowhere near everything that was available in the arcades. You have the baseball bat, the whip, and the knife. Granted, I always thought these were the best weapons in the game, but it would have been nice to have the barrels and the crates as well. Weapons will be carried on the screen by enemies, and you'll need to knock them out of their hands in order to stand over them and pick them up with the left button. They feel good to use, but the animations are just kind of, well, they look dumb. For example, they swing the baseball bat with just one hand. It looks unnatural and silly. But what isn't silly in Double Dragon for the Atari 7800 is the music. The game doesn't have the additional power of the Pokey chip, like that of Commando or Ball Blazer, and that's a shame. Double Dragon certainly was a franchise worthy of the additional horsepower. But somehow the developers were able to get several of the iconic songs to play during the game. You have the title screen music, a few level songs, and even the boss battle theme. It doesn't sound awful either, especially considering that the TIA chip is doing all the heavy lifting here. The sound effects aren't too bad either, but much like everything else, well, there's something a little goofy here. When a Bobo dies or grunts, he sounds like a car motor being revved. I always got a kick out of that as a kid, but luckily it's not abrasive to the ears. Just a bit odd if I'm honest. You'll also traverse a nice variety of areas, and the game takes a little while to get good at, and to master. You'll start in a city, move on to a warehouse, venture into a forest and a cliffside, cross a bridge, and eventually storm the gang's fortress in order to rescue your beloved Marion. The final boss in this game is Machine Gun Willie, and you don't have to fight your brother or anything like that in this version. At least, not in single player. My experience with 2-player is limited, but from what I remember, it was alright. A fun novelty, but I remember being able to damage your brother, which wasn't great. Today, Double Dragon on the 7800 can command a price of $50 to $70 loose, and as much as $125 to $150 complete in box. It's getting up there, so let's head into the Atari Network pros and cons section, and see if it's a price worth paying, or if it's a game only worthy of emulating. And as we always do, we'll start with the pros. Double Dragon can be played in both 1 and 2-player modes, which is a welcome addition. You do have a nice variety of moves, and Billy and Jimmy Lee control very well. I do like the backgrounds, and I think the Abobo sprite is really well done. The music is pretty good too, especially when you realize that the TIA chip is doing it all. The 7800 isn't known for having tolerable sound, so Double Dragon does pretty good all things considered. It can be a fairly long game, as it'll take a long time to master, and there's a decent number of levels. And finally, there can be an impressive number of sprites on the screen at any given time. But for the cons, well, we have to mention that outside of Abobo, the rest of the sprites are pretty bad. They all have their chests out for some reason. There are a few bad animations too, like the animation for swinging the baseball bat. In 2-player mode, you can damage your ally, which I've always hated in these type of games. Also, fighting devolves into using the same move over and over again, waiting for enemies to wander around so they won't fight back. It doesn't feel like a natural fight, if that makes sense. The game scrolls the screen as well, but when the screen is scrolling, it can bog down the frame rate. And finally, there are times where you can lose life after life, and it can become downright frustrating. This happens less once you get the hang of everything, but until then, you'll probably become frustrated a few times while playing. So when taking the good with the bad, I think it's apparent that Double Dragon for the Atari 7800 has earned 2 Pro Line controllers out of 5. It's another game that I've learned to love over the years, much like Scrap Hero Dog, but objectively, it's just not that good of a game. It all comes down to how the developers implemented the enemy behavior. Fighting in the Sega Master System and the NES version feels good. Here it feels like a chore, especially when you're learning how to play the game. Most people get whooped on their first few times playing, and they just give up. And that's not the sign of a good game. If you're willing to learn how to play the game, then it does open up a fair bit. But today you can play any other version, including the arcade one, with absolute ease. It's hard to go back to this one and recommend it over those versions of Double Dragon. But the box is cool though, so collectors might want it just for that reason alone. But enough of what I think, it's time to hear from all of you. Have you played Double Dragon on the Atari 7800? If so, do you like it, or do you agree with the score that I gave the game? Which version of Double Dragon is your favorite and why? Let me know about all this, and whatever else you have to say in the comments down below. And don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video. I'd also like to take this moment to thank the following classy Atarians for supporting the Atari Network on Patreon and via YouTube memberships. Thanks to your support, the channel can continue to grow and go strong. You can support the channel by heading over to patreon.com/7800ProGamer. So thank you to My Own Celestial, OG Hugo, Head Trauma Bob, Jolt7800, Ball Gobbler, Socrates63, Pens the Spook, Mr. Shua TV, Jeremiah Thomas, HugeAss79, DF, and Braylon. You guys rock, and I couldn't do this without you. And with that, it's time to wrap up yet another review on the channel. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a man whose girlfriend was kidnapped outside of my garage, while me and my brother just stood next to our Camaro and did nothing. And I'd like to thank you for watching another video from the evil gang known as the Atari Network. Until next time, remember to stay classy, Atarians.